Hi everybody, welcome to the channel Moyna Bass Fishes. I'm Jim Moyna, your professional bass fisherman on this channel. All right, in this video we're going to talk about stick worms. That's the kind of the generic category from which I guess the Yamamoto Senko would be the original stick worm. And oftentimes people don't use the term stickworm. They just, for no matter what brand, they just refer to this style bait as a Senko. But let's not make no mistake. Not all brands are the same. Not every brand is like the Senko. In fact, the Senko is a little different. And this video is going to be basically giving you a few occurrences where you may want to choose some other brand over the Senko. In fact, personally, I probably use the Senko, the Yamamoto Senko, maybe like 95% of the time. So this video is going to maybe point out the 5% of the time where I might choose a different brand. And it all revolves around the sink rate, okay? The Yamamoto Senko, I got one, and they come in all different colors, okay? So but I wanted to color coordinate with this shirt. So no, just kidding. It's just total coincidence. I grabbed this one, or maybe it was subconsciously put in my brain that when I put on this shirt, then I had to pick this. I don't really know, but this is the one I grabbed. That's Yamamoto Senko, and there's a knockoff brand right there. So the difference between these two and the Senko compared to most knockoff brands is the sink rate. The sink rate is very important to the effectiveness of the Yamamoto Senko. And the reason is, now, sink rate is important if you're fishing it weightless, okay? If you rig this Texas style and put a 1/4 ounce sinker or any size sinker on here, it's just going to fall straight. It's going to fall straight to the bottom, and sink rate and what I'm about to tell you has no bearing on anything. But if you fish it weightless, whether you rig it weedless, like in a Texas style variety without the weight, or you wacky rig this, fishing it weightless, the sink rate is critical. And here's why. The sink rate, first of all, you're going to be able to cast some more targets in a given amount of time. So let's say it's 7 foot deep. This is going to reach the bottom sooner than this bait here that sinks slower. So in the course of a day, you're going to be able to make more casts, cast some more targets, and probably catch more fish. Okay, the other thing about the Yamamoto Senko is because it sinks a little faster, and also I think coupled with the composition of this plastic, they've come up with a really cool formula so that when this sinks, the tips of this bait will like wobble like back and forth like this as it sinks. Maybe not, I'm maybe exaggerating the wobble a little bit, but it does wobble like that. Whereas these slower sinking knockoff brands, I don't know why, but you might get a hint of a wobble out of this, but not near as consistent as the original Yamamoto Senko. So that is another reason why I like using this 95% of the time, because I think that wobble, when a fish sees that, I think that wobble does a good job at fooling the fish into thinking this piece of plastic is alive, because it sees that movement, and fish just go for it. So, what's the 5% of the time where I choose this one? Okay, well, there is a 5% of the time where I choose this one, and there's a good reason for it. If I'm fishing over the tops of weeds, and I have a very narrow window of open water above those weeds, let's say a couple feet, and those weeds are just really clingy type weeds. You know, I'm not talking about hydrilla. Hydrilla is kind of a crispy weed that you can snap your baits free. Like if I'm fishing a wacky rig or an eco rig over hydrilla and I feel a little bit of weed on there, I can just snap the rod tip, and that hydrilla is brittle enough that it just snaps off a lot of the times. But there's certain types of species of aquatic vegetation that is, I mean, as soon as your bait and hook get near it, it like just drapes over the presentation and rendering it completely ineffective. So when I'm presented with that type of aquatic plant, and there's different varieties, and then there's algae, there's that cheesy algae stuff that you can get around. So when I'm presented with that situation where I want to keep this above that, then I'll choose this one, because this one sinks faster. There's going to be a short amount of time from when it hits the surface to when it actually hits the tops of the weeds and gets clunged up and gunked up with the weeds. This, because it sinks slower, it's going to have a slower fall. A slower moving lethargic bass that maybe is a few feet away and sees it and just wants to take its mosey, sweet old time to come over here and check it out. Well, it's going to have that time before this thing sinks down into the gunk. Whereas this will sink faster, and if you got a slow lethargic fish, it may not get there in time for this to get gunked up with the weed. So you may ask, well, why don't you just throw top water, Jim? Well, a lot of times when I'm around that kind of weed cover, I may be wanting to skip this under a dock or skip this under an overhanging tree, or sometimes the fish just don't go for a top water. They want the worm, and sometimes they may pick the worm off the top of the weed as long as it hasn't sunk into it too far. So that's why. And in fact, I just finished fishing a tournament on a lake called Big Stone Lake in Minnesota as part of the Champions Tour. And that was a perfect example of where I chose this worm instead of the traditional Yamamoto, because the fish there were super shallow. They were like, a lot of them were just a few, 2 foot of water or less, a lot of them. And there was tons of just nasty, crappy, gunky weed, and I did not want my Senko to sink down into that stuff too quickly. So I used this worm instead, and I finished third in the tournament, probably caught a third of my fish on this, and then of course the other 2/3 was on a frog that you could just float over that. But I caught a lot of fish under docks, and I'm not as handy as skipping the frog under dock. I can do it, have done it, caught fish doing that. But I'm just a lot more effective skipping this under a dock than a frog. And what you'd have is you'd have the shallow portion of the dock where the dock meets the shore, and the weeds, and you'd have all this just nasty high weeds around the dock. So I just wanted to skip this under the dock and keep it above the weeds, and then skip it to the clean spot right next to shore. And I don't know, that's one situation where like this is just that if you have a narrow window of water before the bait hits the bottom or hits the top of the weeds, I like to use this. Okay, another niche situation I run into in the South, because and basically it revolves around floating docks. Okay, a lot of times around the spawn, especially female bass that maybe have just left the nest and they just want to just sit and chill, a lot of times they'll get under these boat docks, and they'll be literally just, you can see them right under the floats of the docks. If you come up to the dock, and you don't see all of them, but if the illumination is right, if the light's coming from the other direction in the right angle and this and that, and you'll be able to see a fish just sitting there right under one of them dock floats. So in that situation, a lot of times I'll go with the slower sinking variety Senko, because those fish tend to be a little more lethargic. It's not going to matter if the fish is sitting under that boat dock and it's a hotter fish looking to eat something. it's not going to matter which one I throw in there. He's going to hear the splash of the bait. He's going to just charge right over to it and engulf it. But when they're not like that, which a lot of these fish just off the nest, sometimes they're just a little lethargic, not so active, not so eager to eat. So I like to throw this because this will fall a lot slower, and it's just going to hang in their face a little longer, give them a little time to just maybe kick their tails slightly and swim over to it and eat it. Whereas this, this is going to sink faster, and they might just realize it ain't worth the trouble, and they'll just watch it sink into the abyss below the dock. Because some of these, a lot of these docks in the South, I mean, off the ends of them, it could be 15, 20 feet right off the ends. And these fish will be sitting right under them floats, sometimes on the outer floats, sometimes on the inner floats, or in between. It doesn't really matter. It's just the point is, from the surface down to the bottom is just too great a distance for that lethargic bass to, he just doesn't want to leave, that upper column of water right under the dock there. So he's just gonna watch this thing just disappear down into the murk. And he might watch this disappear down into the murk, but he's got a lot longer time to think about it and more time to go over there and to actually grab it if he wants to. So those are the situations where I fish it weightless. and 95% of the time weightless, I'm using the Yamamoto Senko. The other 5%, this one. Just gave you those two niches where I use this one. Now, what if you weight the thing? What if you put, and this has become very popular in recent years, where people are, using a traditional Texas rig on their stick worm, whether it's a 3/16 ounce, quarter ounce, half ounce, whatever. Which one do you want to use then? Well, I don't think it really matters too much, because with that weight on there, you've lost that wobble factor that this gives you, that the true Yamamoto Senko gives you. You've nullified it. There's no longer that. So without that, and they're both are going to sink at almost the same rate with this equal weight on there. If you put a 5/16 ounce sink, bullet sinker ahead of each one of these in a traditional Texas rig, the Yamamoto, this might hit the bottom just a slightly quicker because it is heavier plastic, but I think it's an insignificant amount of time, so that is kind of nullified. So really the weightless advantages that we see are nullified with the Senko. So now, are there any other factors to consider? Yes, there are factors to consider. These are cheaper, okay? You're going to be able to buy more of these for the same amount of money. Yamamoto's tend to run a little more on the spendy side. Well worth it when I'm fishing it weightless. If I'm not fishing it weightless, then heck, why not go with one of these? The other situation, here's the other thing. The plastic composition of this bait, this knockoff brand, as compared to the traditional Yamamoto, the durability of most of the knockoff brands is greater or better than the traditional Yamamoto. Yeah, as many of you know, you get one or two fish on one of these and it's destroyed. You can generally do a little better with this one. So these are cheaper, and you can catch more fish with this worm. So if you're fishing it on just a Texas rig along the bottom, or even an eco rig, why not just go with the knockoff brand, right? So anyways, that's my discussion on the traditional Yamamoto Senko versus the knockoff brands and their slower sinking rates, the fast sinking versus the slow sinking. That's the discussion. And always remember, color coordinate your worms with your shirt. Over.